Hey friends, my name is Steve Guttenberg. This is the Audiophiliac Daily Show, and it's part 3 of the Vintage Preamp Survey, the final chapter. And today it's all about the Audio Research SP3 A1, built in 1975, restored recently by Audio Research. It is absolutely mint condition, actually restored to be better than new by Audio Research. Now, when I opened the box of this 45-year-old preamp, I didn't know that. I could just look at it and say, "Phew, this thing looks perfect, like a time capsule." There it is. Everything about it just seemed fresh, minty, and when I hooked it up and listened to it, well, compared to the other two vintage preamps, the Macintosh C22, which was the first part of this series, the Phase Linear 4000 preamp, both of those sounded old. They did not sound like contemporary preamps. This one actually sounds by far the closest to a contemporary preamp, but it still has that juicy, warm sound, but just a taste of it, not overtly rich or juicy or warm, just the right amount, just dialed in just right. It was also extremely quiet. I'm using very high sensitivity speakers for this review, the Klipsch Cornwall 4's 102 dB sensitivity rating. No, the SP3A1 was just as quiet as a modern tube preamp. Everything about it was just superb. Let me put it to you this way. I used to own, back in the day, back in 1980 or so, 81, I owned a then brand new Audio Research SP6B. I love that preamp. And I gotta tell you, when I switched between sources on that preamp, did not feel as good. I remember being not thrilled about the feel of the controls of that preamp, the switches, everything about it just kind of off-putting even then. And I could hear, if I left on the radio and I was playing turntable, I would hear it through the turntable input. That was not true. That was leakage between inputs. That was not true for this SP3A1. It was quiet as a mouse, I guess, super quiet in terms of hearing other inputs. That was good. Now the Macintosh C22 and the Phase Linear, they definitely had leakage problems between inputs. In other words, you just turn off the source, let's say the radio or tape or something that you're not listening to, and you won't have any problems. But again, not a problem for this one. This one had the feel, everything about it just felt new, you know? So anyway, we were off to a great start, and I love the look of this thing, everything about it. Now, I do have to say, being 45 years old, it doesn't have a remote control. No vintage preamp I'm aware of has remotes. Now, they may be modified to work with remotes, but originally nobody had remote controls in 1975. Oh, and by the way, this preamp, like the other two, the C22 and the Phase Linear, all three came from Sci-Fi Audio in New Jersey. Now, this particular Audio Research SP3A1 sold after I did this review, after I sent it back to them. But they do happen to have another Audio Research SP3, and that one I can tell you the price of because it's still available last time I checked, which was this morning. I think it's $4,500. And that's also been restored. I failed to tell you that the Audio Research SP3 is a tube preamp, an all-tube preamp. It has 8 12AX7 tubes. And like all Audio Research preamps, it is made in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Are they still? I don't know, but that's where this one was made, and that's where they were located for a very long time. So it does have tone controls, defeatable tone controls. I didn't particularly like the sound of the tone controls, so I barely used them, but it does have a variable loudness control called contour, where you can, with a knob, you can dial in the amount of contour you want. Now, loudness, if you don't remember what loudness means, loudness is basically for late night listening, where it boosts the bass and treble to create, makes it sound more like you're listening loud when you're listening quietly. In other words, you can listen quietly and not feel like you're missing out on anything. And it worked very well. Oh, as an interlude to this episode, I want to tell you that when I owned this Audio Research SP6B back in the early 80s, at the same time that I had the 6B, I also had a Mark Levinson preamp, an ML1, which was used, but it was only about a year old at that time. And I lived with both of those preamps for a year or two, and I would alternate between the Audio Research SP6B and the Mark Levinson. And here's the way that worked. When I went from the Audio Research and switched over to the Mark Levinson, the sound was obviously more transparent. It was quieter. It just had this velvety, effortless sound quality. I really, really liked that preamp. But when I went from the Mark Levinson to the Audio Research preamp, it was more like, that feels so much better. That just feels more like music. So I would describe the differences then, remember this is early 1980s, is that the Mark Levinson, the ML1, was sort of a head trip. It was cerebral. I would think about how clear it was and how pure it sounded. But when I went to the Audio Research, it sounded more human, more musical, more like real people playing there. I just found it interesting how I felt about those two preamps. I liked them both, but I'll tell you then, if I had to choose, and I did, I would choose the Audio Research, and I sold the Mark Levinson first. Back to this one, the Audio Research SP3 A1. So in other words, Audio Research in those years used to change models even within the number of the preamp, like 6 or whatever. There was the original, and there would be an improved one, and then be another one, and another one. As a matter of fact, as far as I can tell, Audio Research was offering SP3 updates up until recently, but Audio Research told me emphatically they still do service on all of their products. That is extra cool. The rest of the system that I used with the SP3, well, I told you it was Cornwall 4s, Klipsch Cornwall 4s. For power amps, I was using either the SIT3, the First Watt SIT3, or a Passlabs XA25. The DAC is a Mytek Manhattan. The phono preamp is a Little Loco from Sutherland, which I'm going to review soon. I keep pushing that one off, but it's a great phono preamp. Turntable is an SME15 with an SME5 tone arm and an Ortofon Cadenza Blue. Now that's a moving coil cartridge, and it's a low output moving coil cartridge. So what I did is I wound up using a step-up device, an old Supex step-up transformer, and well, it sounded okay. But then I thought, maybe let's see if I can just plug the turntable directly into the SP3. It has a phono preamp, obviously, and I did, and it had enough gain on its own, which was surprising, and it was, I wouldn't call it dead quiet, but it was quiet enough to just squeak by, especially with these speakers. So that was kind of cool. I was impressed. The phono preamp sound was, it was lacking something. I can't identify exactly what it was. It didn't have enough oomph. Maybe again, it was a gain issue because I was using a low output moving coil, but it just seemed a little lackluster. Using the Mytek Manhattan DAC, the sound had so much weight and power. It sounded really, really powerful. It had great dynamics. It was alive sounding. Switching over to my reference Passlabs XP30 preamp, for comparison's sake, which is a contemporary preamp, the sound was much more transparent. Low-level detail and ambience and all that stuff was much better on the XP30. Bass was faster and just more controlled over it. All of that was sort of predictable, right? The Audio Research just added more oomph to the sound. It was fun. It's fun. It's a fun-sounding preamp. Actually, in some ways, I prefer it to more modern Audio Research preamps. I mean, like contemporary modern Audio Research preamps that I've heard, but not actually reviewed, so I shouldn't really comment, but I just did. Anyway, it's classic enough, the SP3 A1 is, to satisfy your jonesing for the classic sound, but modern enough sounding that it's it's the right balance between classic and contemporary. So there you have it. The Audio Research SP3A1. Well, it is in this case a one of a kind because, well, somebody already bought it and hopefully will live happily ever after with it. But as I said, Sci-Fi has a second Audio Research SP3, not an A1 as far as I know, but I still see it on their site. So if I piqued your interest in this sort of sound, you might want to check that out. So that concludes this three-part series of vintage preamps. I will probably do more vintage stuff in the future. I don't know what type of products I will do, but I will return to this type of review. I think my work here is at last complete. My name is Steve Guttenberg. This is the Audiophiliac Daily Show. Beyond that, I can tell you, I urge you strongly to check out the Patreon, which can be found at patreon.com/audiophiliac, and there is a link to my Patreon in the description box. There's playlists here for headphone reviews and electronics reviews and speaker reviews and music reviews, and of course, interviews. Oh, I love doing interviews. Interviews with Dan D'Agostino and John Grado and Nelson Pass and John Atkinson from Stereophile. A lot of good interviews for your viewing pleasure. That's it. We're good. I hope to see you back here again very, very soon.